Previously on Flowers for Zoe, Stories for Dennis.
I have a hard time remembering a lot of stuff from the beginning.
You were in the middle of one of the worst times of your life.
If she does have, at least it's better. There's a better chance she's not going to die right here today. Today on the podcast, we discuss Zoe's temporary absence. Then me and Lara get into a discussion about the burden of caregiving and a whole lot more. Stay tuned at the end of the show to hear Lara's therapeutic apology letter to Dennis. And here we are with podcast number 2. So now the question is, what do we do when Zoe's not here? She has an incredibly busy life right now. She's juggling recovery with getting her kids back and dealing with life. Like her life is starting. And maybe we have to accept that part as well and do some of these podcasts without her.
Yeah, we could do that. There will be crises that come up. Yes, there's going to be when things are going on with kiddos. And yeah, you put life on hold and you do that. And, you brought up a good point the other day, which is, maybe it doesn't have to be perfect. Maybe it doesn't have to be silent in the background. That means that she can come to the podcast from wherever she is. And maybe that would, take some stress off her too, right?
So Zoe's not here because she's with a friend.
And Zoe talked about it, this topic of like, how do we support someone? Well, this is how we support. Right now, Zoe's sitting in the hospital with this person, and she is going to be there to hopefully ask some really important questions.
Right. That's what Zoe should be doing right now. She should be at the hospital, talking with the doctors, getting permission that they could talk to Zoe about this stuff.
Yeah. I mean, it's tricky because we don't always get an opportunity to do that because we're often kept out of other people's private, confidential conversations. But when we have opportunities, if this was your child, there's nothing you can do. If this was your 15-year-old child, there's still nothing you can do. My kid has a right to privacy. All it would take is my kid to say to her doctor, I don't want my mom involved.
Yeah.
And there's limits to what would be shared with me.
Right.
Right. So, I mean, that's really activating, I think, for a lot of people, because if you're a parent and you have a minor, that's incredibly frustrating to hear, particularly when not only is this your child, but you are their lifeline. You're there to take care of them, and you need to know what's going on in order to help them. And I think this is why, as caregivers, we become so activated, because these are people that we love and care for. And sometimes we know them almost as well as they know themselves. Like we know them too, sometimes better than any professional. And we want to be able to kind of get our elbows out and say, get the hell out of the way. I need to be involved to help protect and support this loved one of mine. And that's the hardest thing in the world when you see somebody self-destructing. When you see somebody who is either sabotaging or out of control or putting themselves in a dangerous situation, and you see it and you want to get involved and they're not letting you in. I mean, like how incredibly frustrating that is?
I can't imagine because, well, I can with Dennis, but with Zoe, she was right there, like she decided, I want to change this about myself. So helping her was so easy. It was so easy to help her. I gave her a roof over her head, made sure she ate 3 meals a day. She didn't have to worry about paying rent. She didn't have to worry about cigarettes. And it was because she wanted it for herself. Whereas Zoe's friend, she's not even there at that point. She thinks everything's okay.
Thing is there are stages of change. And when somebody's pre-contemplative, it means that they don't see a problem, or they might see that there's a problem, but they feel in control of it. And other people might be looking at them and saying, but you're not in control of it.
You're not in control.
But they're like, no, I'm in control. And they feel that they're in control. And they just don't see what other people are seeing.
Yeah.
And
right.
How do you help those people? Sometimes we help those people by saying, hey, I'm worried about you. I love you. I care about you. I want to help. I hear what you're saying. You want to be in control of this right now. I just want you to know that I'm here. I want you to know that if anything changes and you want me to get more involved, I'm here. So sometimes that's what we can do. And it may
Yeah.
not be what we want to do, but that's what we can do. I
Yeah.
remember I remember there was a period of time where you and I were we were setting up Zoom calls, and it was the three of us, and it was about creating a plan for Dennis, and Dennis was involved. We were working our asses off. We were making plans. We had financial plans, how we were going to like help him manage his money. And nobody was taking money from him. It was all just how do we make sure that his money isn't gone to
Yeah.
drugs? Like, how do we somehow find a way to stabilize him on what he's using, make sure he can keep money in his pocket? And it was the same thing. It was the same thing. It was okay, you got a roof over your head. There's cigarettes here. I'm cooking dinners. You can stay here.
Yeah.
All
Yeah.
we need you to do, right? There was like, the only thing you need to do. And what was he saying? That was his mantra. I'm okay. I know what I'm doing. I'm okay, Laura. I'm telling you, Laura, I'm okay. I don't need to go to treatment. I don't want to go to treatment. And I remember, talking about like how to help somebody on that one particular day. And I'll never forget it. I was in my bedroom on the phone with Dennis. We had had a nice conversation and he was in a pretty good place. And it was in between these calls and he was supposed to be working on getting something together. And that's what came out. He was like, I don't want to go to treatment. And I remember saying to him, "Oh my God, Dennis, like you don't want to go to treatment." And he kind of giggled. He was like, "Yeah, I don't want to go to treatment." I'm like, "You probably really hate it when we keep asking you to do this." And he was like, "Kind of."
I remember you telling me about that conversation
I will never
after.
forget that conversation because, that conversation was so bittersweet for me because that's not what I wanted to have happen. And I'm kind of angry at myself that I allowed it to be okay. But when I said to him, okay, how about I just stop asking you to go to treatment? Like, why? Maybe I just need to accept that you don't want this. And, he was really happy that I was willing to let that go. And that was probably, one of the last times I actually aligned with him in terms of supporting him in the way that he needed. And yet, you know, it didn't amount to anything good. Would he have changed his mind if I had just kept pestering him about it? Is it that I just needed to somehow like show him a new way of looking at treatment? Did we have to somehow prove to him that treatment was different than
What he
how
thought it
he
was. Yeah. I go through all those questions too.
I don't think there's simple answers for how we help somebody, but I know for sure. The one thing I absolutely know for sure is we should never let go of anyone. And when I say that, I don't mean that that means you don't ask them to leave because
Yeah,
sometimes you
I
have to
know.
do that.
Yep.
What I mean is we don't let go of them in the way that we love them and care for them and let them know that we love and care for them.
Yeah. We keep the lines of communication open and we make sure that they hear our voice as much as we can. And
Yeah.
we remind them of a better place where they could be.
Yeah. It means I'm not going away. I will always be here to talk to you.
I think that's so important.
Yeah.
I think it's so important to always be there, right? Even when
Yeah.
they're doing some fucked up things.
Sometimes it's hard. I mean, I remember being at work and, and he would be feeling desperate and he would call and call again and call again. And he was relentless. He would just keep calling back and calling back. And I would be in the middle of something and I would have to flush that call. like the pangs of guilt that I have felt about that.
Yeah.
And I guess the reason why I say this is because it's one thing to talk about how to help someone, it's another thing to be in it. When you're in it, it's always something that you don't quite expect. It's always something that catches you off guard because you're freaking exhausted. And you're also just so impacted by it that you're not at your best either.
Yeah. That's so true. Because you've been worn down and beaten. I mean,
Yeah.
emotionally, verbally.
So
It's
kind of
such a,
like,
oh God, it feels like such a hopeless situation.
but I think if we're going to talk about caregiving and we're going to talk about how do you truly care and support somebody, we also have to acknowledge that sometimes it is under the most difficult situations that when decisions are made, in how we manage phone calls and communication, it is under the most difficult circumstances. So when we choose to always stay in communication and to continue to send that message that, I love and I care for you, well, try doing that when somebody is being really horribly mean to you on the phone,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
I've never had Dennis do that to me. And he never called me like that for money. Ever. He called you. He called mom. He never called me. He knew not to call me. He wouldn't waste his energy on it. I was the always say no guy.
He counted on you for different things.
Yeah, when he finally moved in with me here, he did. Yeah. But before that, there was nothing. I gave him absolutely nothing. I wouldn't even take his phone calls.
It's interesting. He would call me sometimes and he wouldn't ask for anything. Now, it didn't happen very often, but it did happen. He would call and we would talk. And I was always like ready for him to ask for something. Sometimes he didn't. That's what also becomes exhausting is, when you talk about trying to support somebody in some of the worst times, sometimes, I mean, those worst times aren't constant. There's always exceptional days, right? There's always days where you're having a good day, or he'd get his check and things were stabilized and, and he was on his fentanyl patches and, and then you'd have a phone call with him and you're up there anticipating and you're anticipating that things are going to turn and they don't. So, it's kind of like a roller coaster. And it's hard to get into that, when he would call and not ask for anything, you didn't quite trust it. You were like, "Are we really having a conversation? You're asking me about the family? We're just talking." But I wonder if sometimes as caregivers, we have a hard time recuperating. Like, even as you talk about, like, even when Zoe talks about, like, I don't remember, like, how many times Zoe has said, I don't remember. Well, I can't forget. Or as a caregiver, if you remember everything and they don't really remember, because maybe some of those times when they're loopy and out of it, I mean,
Or full of rage, and he forgets for those reasons. What does that mean? I mean, Zoe's a completely different person right now. Completely different on so many levels.
so describe it. What are you noticing that's different?
Oh, she's normal. She walks down the street and you wouldn't look at her twice thinking, "Oh, there's a junkie." She's just another person walking down the street. She's not over animated. She's not fidgety. She's not in your face,
She's quieter.
calmer. And she's also a lot more assertive.
Hmm.
She's an advocate for herself. She was advocating for herself throughout her time getting off of fentanyl. But when she's not on fentanyl and she's 100% herself, she's a really good advocate for herself. She stands up for herself. She's fair. She wants the best for her and her kids. She doesn't want to settle for second. She's like the way you would want a 28-year-old woman to be. She's
Hmm.
strong. She's really strong. She's such an amazing mother. She's not their friend. She's their mother. And she's also very gentle with them. She's very commanding with them, but she's also very gentle. She's a wonderful mother.
She's really thriving with this opportunity to be a full-time mother again.
Oh yeah.
This was one of her biggest motivators.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a real celebration now. to see them all together and, life continues on in some really normal ways.
Yeah, but going back to what you were saying, I mean, the caregiver remembers everything, all the dirty details,
Yeah.
and the addict doesn't. I wonder how Zoe feels about all this, about not remembering. She brings it up a lot.
She doesn't like that she doesn't remember.
Yeah.
We're going to have to ask her more about that. Maybe the conversation here is really the fact that caregivers don't forget that when you care for somebody who is struggling, you are sober and you're witnessing all kinds of things. And you're worried, you're concerned, you're scared for them. You're seeing them behave in ways that scare you. You don't know where things are going. You don't know if they're going to survive. You're kind of preparing yourself for the worst sometimes. This is why we came up with boundaries, because we had to find a way to protect ourselves. Like, I think a lot of these models around, this abstinence model and just say no and putting up boundaries. I mean, I think it came from a place of self-preservation. It came from a place of protection. It never said there was no love there. It just said, I really love you and zero tolerance, because don't know how to do both. Don't know how to support you and also risk feeling all of this and taking all of this risk.
Yeah, I totally see that. And it was self preserving for me too. It really was. Dennis did not interrupt my life until he moved in with me. I made sure of it. That's why I always didn't take his phone calls, didn't reach out to him, and told him, if you want to reach out to me, it's because you want to go to detox or rehab. That was it. Reach out to me then. And I completely shut the door on him. I had the perfect reason to. That's what you're supposed to do. And I really easily got into that role to protect myself and my family.
Mhm.
And I did. He didn't disrupt me and my family. And really what I should have been doing was have my boundaries, but just reach out to him once in a while and say, hey, don't forget, you always have that offer from me. If you go to rehab, I can help.
So we don't have to condone substance use. We get to decide that we are against it. We can decide that we don't approve of it. We can not support it. We can want other things for the person that we care about. We still may not be able to change their mind about what they're doing. They may not be in a place of readiness to accept the help that we're offering. And so I guess, without condoning it, we can still stay in communication with them. We can then let them know how they can stay in our life or where the boundaries are. We can still have limits with how much we're willing to help or what we're willing to do. I guess it's when it's all or nothing. That's the stuff that I don't think we ever really feel good about later.
Yeah, later.
The thing is like you said in the beginning, like when Zoe decided that she wanted help, it was a real game changer. When Dennis decided that he didn't want help in that way, it was a real game changer too.
And part of the reason why he didn't want to go to rehab is because he heard for the past 20 years about rehab, and he's experienced rehab in his own ways through friends and through other users. And he did not like what they had to offer.
I continue to have conversations with people who talk about a mixture of things. They'll talk about treatment centers that they felt really good about, and they'll talk about detox, or they'll talk about treatment centers that were really poor experiences for them. I think Portugal has really taught the world a lot about, what happens when you no longer criminalize substance use and you turn problematic substance use into a healthcare issue. And that's what they've done. And as soon as they turned it into a healthcare issue, then it opened up all kinds of programming around how to support somebody who's struggling with substance use. And I think what they've done well is kind of summarized in this quote. So Gabor Mate says this: addiction is a secondary problem that comes out of a primary problem. So when we put all of the emphasis on the secondary problem, but don't pay any attention to the primary one, then how can we possibly succeed? So By making problematic substance use a healthcare issue, it means that we can better focus on the primary problem. Sometimes the primary problem has to do with poverty or trauma, or, like there's primary problems for which substance use becomes um
I
the
love that.
solution.
I love that about Gabor Mate. I've been reading so much of him ever since you put me onto him.
Mhm.
Isn't that beautiful the way he says that?
Yeah.
Like, what does that mean the solution is for someone that's using fentanyl because they're traumatized by extreme poverty?
Mhm. Well, and we heard Zoe talk about, the stress response, the fear that would come, the fear of withdrawal. Or, in an earlier conversation, she talked about grief and the overwhelming grief that she felt. And opioids became the solution to the problem. And the problem at that time was this overwhelming amount of grief that she struggled to process. It felt too big to bear.
Yeah, yeah, too big to bear.
So when substances become the solution to the problem, it's because it's too big to bear. The primary problem is too big to bear. And the substance user is doing their best to try to solve the problem. And this is working the best. And it may not be the best solution, but it's the best one they've got so far. Dear Dennis, I want to talk to you about when you were really struggling in the fall with addiction and how hard it must have been for you. You were trying to help yourself and you were asking for help in the ways that you knew how. Withdrawal symptoms and the fog of, being under the influence of fentanyl, like it must have been so hard to try to make and to take the steps that everybody was asking you to do when you felt so unwell in that. I'm sorry for not being more supportive. I'm sorry for not being a more supportive sister. I should have dropped everything and made you the first priority. I should have come to you and made a bigger effort to get the support in place that you needed. I should have been by your side to help navigate the things that felt too big rather than just sending money or talking on the phone. I should have done more to let you know that you were important.